Evening, everyone. So let's get started. I want to talk about sort of electioneering type things. I do want to start. There's been a few little comments, but there's a little comment about what Sunak will do immediately after the general election, and some people expecting him to immediately fly to California. I think I will just point out that I think we are expecting him to probably move to California. He likes the Californian vibe, which is fair enough. But I think there are probably a couple of little issues. The first of which is he has children. So he's not going to disrupt their education. By all accounts, Rishi Sunak is, he cares about his kids. I know we don't think of these people as caring about anyone but themselves. I mean, that's true of Boris Johnson. But some of them do. Like Jacob Rees-Mogg famously, according to everyone who knows him and is willing to be honest, is very attentive to his children, very much loves his children, would do anything for them. I mean, and Rishi Sunak, I gather, is the same. So he's not going to disrupt their education, so he won't be immediately going. The second thing is, if he wants to go to America, remember, he did have a green card. Now, a green card is your commitment to becoming an American citizen. And since getting that green card, he became, first of all, an MP in a different country. Then he became Chancellor of that different country. Then he became the head of government for that different country. So, and he obviously had to surrender that green card. I mean, he's technically broken American law. So they may have questions of him before he's allowed to go back there. I suspect he will still be with us for a little while at least. After the election, he may go off for a holiday, but I don't expect him to move anytime soon. Inevitable questions about George Galloway as well. I mean, I've had my say on it, but I will just point this out. I suppose if people have got other questions, that's fine. I mean, George Galloway is just a worm of a man. He is a grifter. He deliberately targets not just Muslim support. I mean, people imagine in Rochdale he gathered this Muslim support to him. No, most of the people who will have voted for him weren't Muslims. He was sending out different letters to different addresses in his campaign material. So there was one of them which was plug in his pro-Palestinian credentials. But I will bear this in mind. So George Galloway, he often tries to attract, he goes to centres with lots of Muslim populations and he tries to say he's the defender of Muslims. He is a man who denied the persecution and genocide of Muslims in China. He is a man who hasn't even defended Assad, who has murdered hundreds of thousands of Muslims in Syria. And he has also defended Putin for the same charge. This is not a man who is the defender of any Muslims in any country on earth. He simply picks and chooses who is and is not allowed to kill Muslims. And but then the second thing is, so he was also sending a very different campaign letter to addresses. So there was where the sort of Muslim community mostly he was sending out his pro-Palestinian campaign material, and to the other communities he was sending out a different one. This one was attacking Muslims. Specifically, it was playing on the grooming gang scandal, right? So he was also attracting the gammons. Bear in mind, George Galloway is a supporter of Reform UK. He supported Reform UK at the last election. He supported the Tories in Scotland. He vocally campaigned for the Tories in Scotland. The man's... It's amazing to me that you have people on the left who are genuinely on the left. They're genuinely left-wing. And yet they support or defend Galloway when you consider his past. And it's like, what is wrong with you? Seriously, what is wrong with you? But at the same time, he's also nothing like... People are amplifying this. Is nothing. He's going to go to Parliament. He's a single MP. He's made a party for himself, but he's basically an independent MP, right? And what's he going to do? He's going to do nothing different to Andrew Bridgen. He's just going to cause a fuss. Do you know what Galloway's done? He's in fact, Matthew's saying that Galloway's second leaflet contained transphobia was akin to BNP manifesto. Well, Interestingly enough, he was wholeheartedly endorsed by Nick Griffin, former leader of the BNP, while the BNP was allowed to be a party. But it's not going to do anything. Like people are just feeding his ego by even really. I mean, it's you can remark on the by-election. He's won the by-election, fine, but that's it. I mean, he's just Andrew Bridgen. That's all he is. He's a left-wing Andrew Bridgen. If indeed, again, he says he's left-wing. I say I can't prove otherwise. It is odd that he hangs around with a lot of people on the far right, but that's up to him. So yeah, he's a left-wing Andrew. In terms of in Parliament, I always describe him as a left-wing Nigel Farage, really. But in terms of his activities in Parliament, that's all he's going to be. He's going to stand up, spreading conspiracy theories. He's not going to get many questions. He's not going to get many questions in most of the debates. He's probably not even going to turn up to most of the debates. The man doesn't care. So I would just ignore him. What's of more interest is the election. Tiller's just said, didn't Sunak give $3 million to a school in California? Something like that, yes. I'm not sure whether it was dollars or what, but he certainly donated millions of dollars to a school. I think when you say school, I think it may have been like a university college or something. But nonetheless, he donated millions to an educational establishment, so we say, in America. And do you know what he donated to his local school in Richmond, where he's the MP for? Bottle of wine. Subsidised bottle of wine, because it was a House of Commons bottle of wine as well. So, I mean, the man has never expressed any... If you were to sort of suggest to Rishi Sunak that he doesn't really care about the country, I mean, it's a charge you can level at an awful lot of his predecessors. You could certainly level it at Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Theresa May probably less so. David Cameron, not sure. But if you were to level the charge at him, give me some evidence you actually care about this country, it's like, you can't really come up with anything, can you? Can't really come up with anything. It'd be interesting to see which party leader welcomes into Parliament on Wednesday. Yeah, Keir Starmer has had a habit of welcoming new members. Arguably, I suspect he won't. Do you know what? It might be quite funny. Maybe it would, just for a laugh. Maybe he will. Because he has welcomed new members. He's even welcomed new Conservative members in the past. I remember when, and I've forgotten his name, I'm afraid, but the guy who won Uxbridge, Boris Johnson's old seat. And so on that occasion, there were 3 new MPs. There was a Labour MP, there was a Lib Dem MP, Somerton and Frome, and then there was a Conservative MP. And Rishi Sunak, who got to speak first, of course, he's the Prime Minister, did not welcome the new member for his own party. And then when Keir Starmer did, it was like, it made Rishi Sunak look utterly ridiculous. But on this occasion, I don't think anyone will complain if he doesn't actually welcome the new member. I don't think Rishi Sunak will. Even though, ironically, the Tories like Galloway more than Labour do. But there we go. Really hope Labour looks serious at the state of our military. Well, I mean, in all honesty, everything. It's one of... There is nothing. If you look at every government department, it's all a mess. And it's not just a mess in terms of underfunding. Like, there are certain departments where the infrastructure is completely buggered. So the military has been completely hollowed out. Just at the time, I keep saying just at the time where we might need it. I know we tend to use our military a lot, but we tend to use our military, if we're honest, forgetting advantageous circumstances for our companies to get involved in, like the oil trade, basically nicking oil. We might actually need a military to defend ourselves. And when I say ourselves, I mean, as in Europe, I would hope we're not going to be imminently in a situation where our own island is attacked, but where we need the military to actually defend Europe. And we've hollowed it out. Then you've got education, of course, where we've got school buildings literally collapsing. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough teaching assistants. So that's the sort of thing, even if you could suddenly inject a load of cash into it, you don't solve the problem overnight. So with the military, even if you were to massively ramp up the funding, it would take years to sort it out. Same with education, same with healthcare. Same with housing. It would even with the funding, it would still take years. But the thing is, we know we're not going to get enough funding straight away. We're going to be getting, it's going to be a little bit of increased funding, trying to, get the best return for that so we can boost the economy, and then a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. So it's going to take a very long time. Daniel said, I've downplayed Galloway's win too much. He got 43% of the vote, which is more than the other major parties combined. The other major parties didn't take part. Labour and the Green Party did not take part. Zero campaigning. Zero. It doesn't matter that they had their name on the ballot. Everyone there knew that those parties were not taking part, and they didn't campaign. You can't just put your name on a ballot and expect people to vote for you. You have to campaign for people's votes. The Conservative candidate went on holiday. The Lib Dems, obviously the Lib Dems and Labour have been in the habit of, if one of them doesn't think they've got a shot in a by-election and the other one does, they tend to step aside. They've been doing that for a few years now. So the Lib Dems were just thinking, well, that's Labour's. We're not going to waste time. So, yeah, the major parties did not take part in that by-election. They were just putting, two of them didn't take part in it at all, and the other two were just making a token effort. So no, I'm not downplaying it. He would have lost it if Labour had had a candidate that they supported. He will lose it at the general election. He may not even stand in the general election. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it on at least one occasion when he's actually won an election, he's not even tried? Was it Bradford where he didn't even, Bradford West was it? Someone correct me. Where he didn't even bother contesting the seat at the election. But anyway, I mean, the man's is not worth talking about too much. He's a fart in the wind. Tax the people who've robbed our taxes for the past 14 years. There are always difficulties with things like that. There are two. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's too difficult, so therefore not to do it. The two major difficulties are, first of all, wealthy people are really very adept at getting out of paying taxes. So it's never as straightforward as some people imagine. The other problem is, and this is the political problem, is there are some people who think they will end up. People don't have an accurate view of what a new tax policy will mean for them. And the example I always use is the inheritance tax. I call it the inheritance tax trap. So 4% of people, if you look at the way inheritance tax currently is, the current rules for inheritance tax means that only 4%, that's 1 in 25 people, will pay inheritance tax. But polling last year showed I think it was over a third, in fact, about a third, maybe a bit over a third, think they will. So you've got way more people, you've got a large chunk of the population who think they are, or their children more specifically, or maybe if they're waiting on inheritance, but you've got a large chunk of the population who think that they will be affected by inheritance tax when they won't at all. When they won't. And it's that disparity. So although you can come up with a tax policy and you can go, oh, but only like the top whatever percent will ever pay it. If people don't think that, if people think they'll pay for it, you lose votes because they think they're going to hit you. So this is part. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think to an extent Labour may be being excessively cautious in some regards, but you can't just go, well, look, this is the economic reality and we're going to stick with it, because economics and politics are very intertwined. If you consider, for example, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, at the end of the day, what brought Liz Truss and Kwarteng down? Ultimately, private investors. It wasn't MPs, it wasn't the public. What brought them down was they didn't even implement it. Remember, they didn't even implement their plans. They announced a policy, a taxation policy, that investors in the gilt market didn't like, and those investors therefore decided that the British pound was not worth investing in at that point, and we nearly, if the Bank of England hadn't intervened, we would have had a run on the pound. That's private investors bringing a prime minister down. If Labour do the same thing, you know, that can happen. Could Galloway end up being the shortest serving MP ever? That's a good question, because it is a good question. So yeah, going back to what I was originally trying to try and talk about is because Labour think there might be a very quick announcement of the general election. So I keep talking about, if the election is going to be on May the 2nd, that the Sunak will have to make the announcement in the next 3 and a bit weeks. Realistically, you might say 2 and a bit. You know, we might be expecting the budget comes out, and if they're going to go for May, probably 2 weeks after that, that they'll make the announcement. When would that make that? Would that be like the 20th or something? Where's my third? Yeah, I think that'll be something like the 20th maybe. But I did a video earlier today, talking about sort of Labour's fear. So Labour fearing that because they've announced the closing of various what you might call tax loopholes, right? That will raise more tax revenues, which they want to use to invest. So what the Tories are planning to do, we're told, anyway, obviously we don't know until Jeremy Hunt announces it, but we're told that they're planning on adopting a couple of Labour's plans, such as scrapping non-dom status and applying windfall taxes to oil and gas companies, which they're not currently doing, despite the fact that they, you know, some people think they are. And then using that money to fund tax cuts, which then means, because Labour at the moment have got that tax money earmarked for investment. So it means that if that happens, it puts a hole in Labour spending plans, which they will have to plug by doing one of 3 things or some combination. They'll either have to raise taxes somewhere else, which means putting taxes up, not necessarily for ordinary people, but the Tories will say it is, or they'll have to increase borrowing, in which case the Tory media will go, oh no, they're going to get us into massive debt, or they'll have to reduce their spending plans further, at which point people who are already miffed at them scaling back their green investment plans are going to go, hang on a minute, what's going to be left here? So, you know, that's the plan. But for that plan to work, you don't give Labour half a year to rejig their spending plans. What you do is you announce the budget and then you immediately call an election. So there is a possibility, I'm not saying I think this is likely, by the way, but there is a possibility that this Wednesday we have PMQs. George Galloway may saunter into the House of Commons if he can be asked. Then we'll have the budget. Then afterwards, Rishi Sunak, after the questions have been taken about the budget, of course, by Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak may disappear back to Downing Street, tell journalists, oh, I've got a bit of an announcement. The lectern will come out without the government crest on it, and he'll announce the election on Wednesday afternoon. That's possible. It doesn't have to be on the same day, but that would minimise the amount of time Labour have got to sort their spending plans out. So if the Tories are thinking to themselves, the polls aren't going to get any better, they could get worse. I know it's hard to look at them and go, could they really get worse? But they could. So they could look at it and think, look, the polls might get worse here. If they want to go in and put Labour on the back foot on their spending plans, their best bet is to have the election as soon as possible after the budget, which means calling it straight away after the budget. In which case, yes, it could be that George Galloway turns up to Parliament next week and then the following week Parliament's dissolved for like an April election. That is possible. I don't know whether that would make him the shortest serving MP. Should we have a quick look? Should we try and find it? Because I'll bet you in history at some point there'll have been an MP who was made an MP and died the next day or something. You know, shit himself to death or something. But let's see if we can find it. Oh, hang on. There's a record of non-posthumous service. So the shortest non-posthumous service was that of Alfred Dobs, who was declared elected MP for Smethwick on the 26th of July and was killed the following day in a car accident on the way to take his seat. So there, yeah, I knew there would be something like that. So there was an MP in the last century who was elected, and then he was on his way to Parliament and got killed on the way. So he wouldn't be the shortest serving. He may be I suppose the shortest serving. If you looked at it where it wasn't caused by a death, but I don't know. I'd have to look at that anyway. How do I expect Labour to have more than a term in government if they're not prepared to fund public services properly? They are prepared to fund public services properly. You say the excuse that the government have bankrupt the country won't last long. As long as they show improvement, it can last. You would be surprised. You would be surprised. All they have to do is show improvements. Like, I don't mean on a graph. I mean people to feel the improvements, and they can do that. People keep thinking to themselves that the only way to get people to see improvements is to massively grow the economy. But that's a trickle-down economics theory. Trickle-down economics is bollocks. That's not how you do it. How you do it is a better distribution of wealth. So the economy doesn't have to grow very much at all in the first term, although bear in mind, Labour have promised to grow the economy more than other G7 economies, which I think is a frankly bizarre thing to say. But they don't have to grow it very much. All they have to do is to improve the distribution of wealth. And you think, well, so how are they planning on doing that? Remember, their very first piece of legislation out of the gate is their workers' bill. You know, like the employment rights bill, whatever it ends up being called. That is going to give workers the power, and unions, the power to demand better wages. You know, getting rid of fire and rehire. I don't know exactly what their plans on 0 hours contracts are, but it is still their policy to sort of basically get rid of them. 0 hours contracts is a funny one though, because it'll be one of those where there'll be certain tolerances, I suspect, but nonetheless massively scaling them back. Shit himself to death. Was Elvis Presley an MP once? Who knows? It was before my time. Actually, he did die when I was about 1 year old, but I don't really remember him. Another reason they may call an early election is the campaign would be short, thereby limiting Sunak's exposure. It might be a bit late for that now, if I'm honest. Now that Rishi Sunak's popularity is as low as his party's, they're on a minus, according to Ipsos Mori anyway, on a minus 34 approval rating. It may just be too late for that. And as for the general election campaign itself, there is a minimum period for it. I mean, is it? I can never remember if it's 5 or 6 weeks, but it has to last, you know, a certain amount of time. I think it's 5 working weeks, like 25 working days, sitting days. So it's not that Parliament will be sitting during it. So I think it's like 5 weeks at least. Ondank's just looked it up. 46 is the shortest to non-death. So yeah, if it's not caused by death, if you're correct, then I assume you are, then yes, Galloway could be. Because remember, as soon as the general election is called, well, I mean, Sunak can announce the general election without Parliament being immediately dissolved. But once Parliament's dissolved, there are no more MPs. So there are still members of the government. We still have a government, but they're not MPs anymore. So once Parliament has been dissolved for the election, we don't have any MPs in the country. So if there were, for example, to be an emergency, we have a government, but that government could not recall Parliament to enact any emergency legislation. And that is one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak is under pressure not to call the election in November, because having the US presidential election in November, which they can't change it, that's set for them. And if we had it as well, you'd have 2 of the Five Eyes countries, which also includes, of course, New Zealand, Australia and Canada, going to the polls at the same time, which would open us up. That would make us particularly vulnerable to Russian cyber warfare. And, you know, if we were under attack, although we have a government, we'd have a government that's more interested in campaigning than running the country, and it would not be able to recall Parliament because there'd be no Parliament, there'd be no MPs at that point. So Galloway doesn't just, it's not like when we talk about MPs losing their seats in a general election, it's technically, if we're going to be pedantic, it's not really true. They just don't get it back, because all MPs lose their seats as soon as the general election begins. Did I see your comments earlier? I may not have them. No, sorry. Why 2nd of May? Since there are other elections happening on that day, police and fire commission, local elections, etc. Yeah, although I can see benefit in holding the general election in April, particularly if they are going to go for this dodge, and we don't know that they are or not, it's just reports, right? But if they are going to go for this dodge of trying to close a few tax loopholes, but use that to fund tax cuts and dare Labour to put them back up, then you want to give Labour as little warning as possible. There's no point in playing silly buggers with Labour's spending plans in the budget if you'll then give Labour 6 or 7 months to come up with a new plan, because they just will. Apart from anything else, if you give Labour an extra 6 months to sort their spending plans out, you might find that 6 months later the economic outlook's improved, and maybe it might not have done, but maybe then, it's easier for Labour to close that hole in their spending plans without doing anything radical. So, again, all of this to me, I know lots of people, and lots of people who are far better connected than I are still going, no, we still expect autumn. It's just, I just don't see it. But, sorry, I was going on a tangent. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So the benefit to May the 2nd specifically is that because the local and mayoral elections are on at the same time, there's 2 advantages to the Tories in holding it then. The first is they haven't got that many activists. I mean, some of you will be activists. I've campaigned. It's particularly dispiriting when you're going knocking on doors, campaigning, handing out leaflets, if you're getting a load of abuse at the doorstep. Which is why I never give anyone abuse at the doorstep, even if it's like a Conservative. Because, they're people at the end of the day. And, I know what it's like to have someone giving you a load of abuse at the doorstep. And some of them don't mean it. Some of them are actually really rude. Some of them they don't mean it. They're not having a pop at you, but it's still dispiriting. So, obviously, when you're about to be on for the biggest loss of your lifetime, Conservative activists will be getting a lot of unfriendly responses, should we say, on the doorstep. So it's harder to motivate them. And also they don't have as many. And they can't be arsed with it. I mean, some of these party members are looking at what Sunak's doing and going, well, you're not even trying. Why should we put in the effort if you're not even trying? Whereas they will put in the effort in parts of the country that have got local or mayoral elections, they'll put in the effort for them, because those candidates will probably put in the effort as well. So by having the general election on the same day, your activists will be campaigning for all of them at the same time. They'll be campaigning for the ones who have local elections. They'll be campaigning for the mayoral elections. So they'll just do the campaigning for the general election at the same time. The second advantage is if the election does not take place by May the 2nd, then the Tories are going to be in for a punch in the nose, because the protest voters will come out and they will protest against the Conservatives in those mayoral and local elections to send a message to the Tories. Whereas if the general election is either on the same day or earlier, those people no longer feel the need to withdraw their vote from the Conservatives just to send a message. So there's multiple advantages to having it on May the 2nd for the Tories. Could Galloway have the least amount of recorded votes by an MP in a single parliament? There's a lot of things we're going to have to look up here. Again, it would not surprise me if, certainly the MP who died on the way there, but if we're talking about ones who lived, it wouldn't surprise me if there are some MPs who've got no voting record at all. But again, who knows? Apart from anything else, George Galloway himself has been an MP for a short period of time in the past. I can't always remember, because again, he doesn't live rent free in my head. I don't really think about George Galloway a lot, if I'm honest. But I seem to recall there was one time when he won a by-election, just like now, that was very close to a general election. he may not have done much voting then either. 909 Shion saying that I remember campaigning in December for 2019 general election. It was awful in the dark and cold. I mean, it round here it was not a happy time for Labour canvassers either at all. But there we go. Punny Nate say I did my first canvass day for Labour. It was surprisingly welcome activity. Good. I mean, you will find, so when you've been in opposition for a long time, it depends where you are, of course. There are still like strong Conservative areas who will think Labour are really dreadful people, or strong SNP areas if you're in Scotland, for example. But by and large, you're going to have a much more friendly response as a Labour canvasser right now than you will as a Conservative one. It will change. 10 years' time, it will be different. But, yeah. Will I be doing a watch along on election night? So what I've said I will probably do is I'll do a live stream when the polls close on election night. That's my plan anyway. I'm not going to promise anything without knowing exactly when the election is. For all I know, I'll be in hospital with a broken leg. Who knows? But hopefully not. But all things being well, my plan will be to do a live stream when the polls close. But I'm not going all the way through the night, or very likely not going through all the night. But I may do a live stream of some kind. It could either be a 1 hour stream like this, where we just, because the exit polls will come out, so we could talk about those, have a look what's going on, have a little discussion. The issue with going through the night, there's multiple issues with going through the night. First of all, although, I mean, you know, other people in the house will want to go to sleep and they don't want to listen to me jabbering away. The other thing is the next day, of course, I will want to be doing videos of the results. I may be very tired for that if I go through the night. And the other thing is, like, what do you do in a stream that goes all night? You know, I'd like have to play computer games or something and just wait for results to come up. That would, you know, again, there's not very much, there's certainly no rewatchability value. Excuse me. So what I suspect I will do is a stream at 10. What I have thought of doing, again, I'm not committing to anything yet. I've thought a stream at between 10 and 11, so an hour stream, where we can go over the exit poll results, which should be published within that hour. And potentially a stream the following morning, although to be honest, well, yeah, it's possible I do a stream the following morning, and then there'll just be then the usual video at the normal times, potentially. Welcome for your election night live stream. So there's lots of people going to be doing election night live streams, are there? Could play Alien Isolation. Now, the thing is, right, when it comes, see, Graham on Labour Social keeps saying, oh, you should do like gaming streams for Labour Social. And it's like, so it's my main hobby, playing computer games. But I'm not a computer game aficionado because there's only like a small number of games I like playing. So, you know, there's like, so it's really weird for someone who spends, well, a fair amount of time playing computer games when I get time. But I play hardly any game. Most games I don't like. So I don't like most computer games. So there you go. So yeah, there's hardly any games I actually want to play. Was thinking about those people who need to count the ballots. If you have 2 to 3 lots of ballots to count in area, deserve a medal. Oh, the people who do that are, yeah, absolutely deserving of high praise. You know, it's a lot of, yeah, it's hard, grueling work in unsociable hours. You know, Baldur's Gate 3 plus election special. Do you know what? Maybe because I haven't actually played Baldur's Gate 3. Because I'm not sure about it. I'm a huge fan of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. I play them quite regularly. I usually play them through every 2 or 3 years. Baldur's Gate 3 is a very different game. I may still like it, but I haven't tried it before. I may try it this year. But I have because I have several other games. I play MMOs mostly. and there's always lots to do in those. Like I'm playing through characters again on Lord of the Rings Online at the moment. The only video I've done is Space Invaders. Yeah, okay, I'm a bit more up to date than that. What's my favourite game? Well, currently, the one I'm playing most at the moment is Lord of the Rings Online, but I also play World of Warcraft, Star Wars The Old Republic, and Elder Scrolls Online, and Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. Those are the ones I play, and that's it. I don't play any others. But I haven't ruled out giving Baldur's Gate 3 a go. I'm saying if I had anything other than an iPhone and iPad to record anything with, I'd probably try and stream myself playing The Sims 4. So yeah, but most games just I don't get on. I have enjoyed a wider variety of them in the past, but not so much now. I had a game called Election on the Spectrum. Well, I had a game called UKPM on the Acorn Electron. I imagine it was available on other formats as well. That was my first little foray into politics. I was a very bad prime minister. Every time I played it, and I'm not kidding, every time I played it, I ended up facing a very bruising vote of no confidence the following year, because even then I was a socialist, I think, but I was a very bad socialist. So I kept my budgets were terrible. I kept going, well, we need more funding for this and more funding for this. And I ended up generating hyperinflation and being booted out of office the following year. So, yeah. So when people talk about, for example, things like even economists, and they say, well, money doesn't really exist. You could do what you like. You do this and that, and you can have whatever funding you need. Because what they're doing is they're looking at the example of Russia, because that's pretty much what Russia do. And I'll be honest, I'm not an economist. I don't know how Russia get away with it. But I do know we wouldn't get away with it. And how do I know we wouldn't get away with it? Because ironically, some of the things that actually left-wing economists urge Labour to do, Liz Truss, for totally different reasons, tried to do herself, and look what happened. And as I say, in this, and I know a computer game is not real life. It's what happens is down to the parameters of whoever programmed that game, right? But yes, hyperinflation set in. I was like, what, 7 or 8 years old or something when I was playing it. Could we gift you a game? No, I'm quite happy to buy games. I just don't like them. I like a very small number. It's hardly any games I like. Because that's the weird thing. It's like, it's easier for me to say I don't like computer games, even though it's my main hobby. Just because there's like 5 I like. And I have tried others. And in the past I have sound like more of a hardcore gamer than me. I used to be. The first YouTube channel I had was a gaming channel. I was, a competitive player in World of Warcraft. But, work got in the way, and I now no longer have the time, which is fine because I like dipping between different games now anyway. Right, shall we... all right, let's go on to a politics question. Daniel to the rescue. I found Rishi's speech on Friday very worrying. Even worse than that, Keir Starmer appeared to support it. Why would I vote for another authoritarian? Strange language from a human rights lawyer. So you have to listen to what Starmer actually said. Yes, he did support it, but he didn't just say, oh yeah, great speech, I fully support it. That's not what Starmer said. What Starmer said was he approved of the fact that Rishi Sunak was calling out extremism, including far-right extremism. That's what Starmer said. And I'll tell you why he did it. I will just say, first of all, there are certain things that are a matter of opinion. Am I saying you should totally trust Keir Starmer? Not at all. I don't. Why should you? But there are certain things that are just ridiculous. Calling Keir Starmer an authoritarian is ridiculous. And you've just said it yourself. It was a human... And it's not just that he was a human rights lawyer. You could argue Dominic Raab was a human rights lawyer, a crap one, but he was. Keir Starmer, during his career as a human rights lawyer, did an awful lot of good work pro bono. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I'll take your case on if you give me a sack full of cash. He did a lot of good work pro bono. The idea that this man is an authoritarian is off the wall. But the reason why he won't... Because you could say to yourself... Because there were things in Rishi Sunak's speech to go, okay, great, yeah. For example, he called out right-wing extremism, yeah? So there were things you could absolutely say, yeah, okay, that's fine. But there were also things to criticise. So what you may be thinking is, why didn't Starmer criticise it? Strategy. The reason Rishi Sunak made that speech yesterday is he's desperately in search of a wedge issue with Labour. He's trying to find a fight with Labour over something that's not the economy or healthcare or anything that matters to people. He's desperately in search of Rishi Sunak is a prime minister in search of a culture war. He wants to fight a culture war with Labour. And that is why Labour keep blocking him off. What Labour want to talk about is the economy, healthcare, housing, education, things like that. They're even happy to talk about asylum. But what they want to talk about is government policies. So what Starmer has done is said to Sunak, I'm not having a fight with you about this because it's irrelevant. So that's the reason for that. If it's any consolation, I lasted longer than Liz Truss in that PM game. I did. That is true. That is true. I did. But again, it is just a game. It is possible that in real life, well, me as an 8-year-old in real life may not have lasted as long as Liz Truss did. I'd like to think I would last longer these days. And Baldur's Gate 3 is the 5th edition rules, so it's more up to date. Yeah, I do have the 5th edition rules. Even though I haven't actually played 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but I always get the new rules because, you know, it's a game I used to play a lot. So I always update my rules. Adam's saying, yeah, I mean, money doesn't really exist, but we have to pretend it does. Oh, yes, exactly. We do have to pretend it does. You cannot just print what money you like because there are international... Like, you can't just have a country that goes, oh, we'll just print our own money and then use that, like... Because if you... The more money you print, the lower value it becomes. So... You know, so yeah, you have to collude in the illusion, otherwise it all falls down, basically. Wangapeg is saying, what separate deals are Labour looking to make with the EU outside of the trade and cooperation agreement? So one of the things I was talking about a fair bit last year was the Pan-Mediterranean Convention, Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, that is. What that is it's a rules of origin thing. So obviously, while we are outside of the customs union, we are subject to rules of origin to get out of, you know, having to pay tariffs on stuff we export to the single market. So, and we are going to be outside the customs union for the foreseeable by the sounds of it. So really, what we want, we won't ever get rid of the paperwork, but in order to deal with at least the tariffs, is to make sure that we can meet rules of origin. Now, what this agreement is, it's an agreement that the EU have with quite a few countries, not only in Europe, but outside the EU, but also in North Africa, in the Middle East as well. It covers quite a few countries. And what it says is, any components or materials or goods that are considered to be produced in those countries can count as being produced in any of the countries within that agreement. So in other words, if we were in this agreement, we could say, because I think Morocco's in it, so we could say if we imported some raw materials from Morocco to use in manufacture of something, it's like they were produced in Britain. So it makes it easier for us to be able to sell tariff-free to the EU. And just because that's a good idea, you could say, well, that doesn't mean, say, Labour are going to do it. No, but when I went to the Labour Party conference and Stella Creasy came in, who's the Labour, she's a Labour MP, but she's also chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. She was grinning like a Cheshire cat, and she was talking about this. So she must know that Labour are very keen on that. So there are deals that we are going to be able to do. It's not, and I know the longer we stay out of the single market and the customs union, the more we're sort of shackling ourselves. But there are things we can do. It's not like we are where we are and there's nothing else we could do, because there are, as the EU has moved on, it has formed agreements with other countries that fall short of customs union and single market access. So what we should do is basically work on those. Can you be a YouTuber with just an iPhone, an iPad and a gaming laptop? Would you need cameras and other stuff? I don't really know, because I've tended to do it so what I use if I was to stream games, I use what I'm using to stream this. I use a program called XSplit Broadcaster, which has a fee. You do pay a fee for it. Some people use OBS, which is free, but I never got on with it. And because XSplit, you know, I mean, certainly I can afford it, so I just use that. And because I don't like phones or tablets, I have them, but only at need. I prefer computers. So I just, you know, so I don't know. I can't give advice to anyone. Dan saying, did I see Lucas challenge Lammy on Labour not commit to wealth tax? I did indeed. Lucas launched her case for wealth taxes, how we fund public service that we need to invest. I agree with that. Yeah, I do agree with Lucas on that one. The issue for Labour, again, is it comes down to, I mean, obviously, I'm not party to their discussions, right? Their shadow cabinet discussions. So I don't know exactly what their objection was, other than I do know the problem with creating new taxes is the Tory media will tell ordinary people that they will be paying it. That's the problem. Now, is that the only reason why Labour have ruled out a wealth tax? I couldn't tell you. But I myself, like, I have a funny attitude with wealth taxes. If we were like to build up a country from scratch, a society from scratch, I don't think there should be a wealth tax. But the reason I say I don't think there should be a wealth tax is because you wouldn't need it. If you build up a society from scratch and incomes were taxed properly, then that would be fine. You wouldn't ever need a wealth tax. However, because incomes have not been taxed properly for a very long time, people have accumulated huge levels of wealth that is not doing anything. It's not circulating around our economy. So the way I see it, and I'm not an economist, but the way I see it is without a wealth tax, we are just going to have huge levels of the country's wealth just festering. So I am in favour of a wealth tax in order to get some more money circulating, basically. And like Caroline Lucas herself said, there are countries, she did actually mention Switzerland. I wouldn't be mentioning Switzerland, in all honesty. But she mentioned a Scandinavian country. I've now forgotten which one. So I would certainly always, whenever you're looking for examples of a system that works economically, look at Scandinavian countries. So she certainly, do Morocco have to make electric car batteries? No, we're still buggered on the car batteries thing. Nowhere in the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention is making them. But over the coming years, there probably will be. So it will help for that. But yeah, in the short term, it won't help with the car battery issue. But we have had a stay of execution on that of 3 years. And if we were to join the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, then at the end of that 3 years, if the EU doesn't need an extension, then nor should we, because we should be on an equal footing then. Was the Tories' original plan to implement fascism with after 2019, but Johnson and Truss self-imploded? They'll try again in 2029. This is why it's so important that we have electoral reform. So important. Wherever the Conservatives, they'll pick up, when they come back to power, they'll pick up where they left off. They'll totally pick up where they left off. It's really hard to imagine that the Conservative Party will have root and branch reform to basically get rid of the UKIPers. Because you look at what Labour have done in the last few years to transform the party, and it's still a work in progress. And I think the Tories need much more fundamental reform than Labour have put in, and they're not even acknowledging the problems. Labour acknowledged the problems, and it's still been a difficult process, and it's still not complete. whereas the Conservatives will not even acknowledge those issues. So I don't see the Conservatives reforming, which means even if the people pushing for authoritarianism take a back seat, because there'll come a point where they recognise that their ideas are not electable. So they'll take a back seat and they'll let moderates take over again, but they will still be in charge and they'll come back. It'll be just like 2010 all over again. You know, people like David Cameron and George Osborne, they all seemed very reasonable, didn't they? And people thought, oh, you know, these are a bit more screwed on, after the likes of like Ian Duncan Smith, for example. But the same people that were driving Ian Duncan Smith, they were still there. They were still there and they were still in charge. Putting it, it was very hard left, I would say, instead of wealth tax, put a wealth limit. No individual can have more than £1 million until everyone has reached the threshold. It's like houses in Monopoly. Yeah, I can see political problems with that. No, why wouldn't we charge income tax on dividends? Yeah, we should. Absolutely. That's a nonsense to me as well. There's several things, like the thing I've noticed, because for most of my life I paid pay as you earn, so I didn't pay tax directly. My employer did it on my behalf. So I just got my pay slip. I didn't have to do anything. So when I started monetizing YouTube and started, with having to do tax returns, and particularly when this channel started doing well, what I noticed, and I hadn't really appreciated this before because you don't really need to know much about taxation unless you're paying it yourself, is, for example, when I'm trying to work out, because obviously I need to make sure I can afford my tax bills. I can't wait until HMRC work it out for me and then go, oh, I haven't got enough money. So I use Listen to Taxman, which is a web-based app, which is really useful. And, I keep an eye on what tax I'm likely to have to set aside. And the amount of tax I always pay is always less. And the reason for that is it's assuming that I'm an employee, this Listen to Taxman, but because I'm not, because I'm self-employed, I pay a lower rate of national insurance. The income tax is the same, but I pay a lower rate of national insurance. And that's not right. But I also understand why the government, like even a Labour government, can't just say, yeah, we're changing that, because there's a lot, an awful lot of people are small business owners. There's like ridiculous number in this country. It might be the same in other countries, I don't know. But there's a hell of a lot of voters who are small business people, and they also tend to vote. Because if you are a small business person, tax policy is really important to you. So they tend to pay attention. Well, they don't pay attention to politics necessarily, but they do engage in the political process. So I can understand that being a bit trickier. But things like, how many people really benefit from dividends? That's what I would query. Is it politically damaging to just, because, things like having different, capital gains tax and dividends, sources of income that you don't really consider income is really weird. I can see how there might be grey areas like topically at the moment, selling a house or something like that. I can get that. But generally speaking, if you're getting income, particularly from dividends, you don't even work for dividends. You just, it's okay. If you're not very good at it, it can also be almost be akin to gambling. But nonetheless, you're not really working. You're not producing anything for it. You may put work in so that you can know what to invest in, but usually you don't, do you? People who invest mostly don't actually make the investments themselves, just get someone else to do it. So I don't understand why that. There's lots of ways of getting out of paying income tax on income, which I think, should be dealt with. But I do appreciate that some things are politically awkward. It's a little bit like how they keep increasing taxes on tobacco and stuff. You had to do it a bit at a time. Pollinator, I can see Truss being the first Tory leader post-general election since they wanted a replacement. The party convinced she was right. I I don't see that, in all honesty. I suspect that the party accept that she has a poor reputation in public because it's so bad. You know, I know some of them think that like Boris Johnson would be a good leader or Nigel Farage would, and you look, well, they're really unpopular as well. But Liz Truss is so unpopular that even Tories will have to acknowledge that. So Liz Truss, I strongly suspect, will not even attempt to become leader again. She'll have to do some, you know, she may have a plan long term to become the leader. I don't think she will even throw her hat into the ring straight away. I could be wrong. I think we're probably talking Kemi Badenoch. You can't rule out Suella Braverman, but she seems to be hated by the far right as much as anyone else. James Cleverly's name keeps coming up. I mean, there's not a lot of names in the hat. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it ended up between James Cleverly and Kemi Badenoch, in all honesty. Priti Patel keeps sniffing around, so don't be surprised if she throws her hat into the ring. An argument for only capital gains tax on dividends is that it encourages people to invest with private wealth. Not sure how much I personally believe this argument. It's what they say. Again, because I'm not an economist, I can't comment on things like this. I am all for pragmatic taxation policy. I know there's a lot of tax where you would just say, look, you get a certain amount of income, everyone should just pay income tax at the set rate. Ideologically, that is the position. I am always prepared to be pragmatic with that. If there's a system that works better and is better for the economy, but just doesn't fit the ideology, do you know what? That's fine. I'm all about practicality. But what I would say is at the moment, tax policy is not working in our favour. It's not working in the economy. If you've got a load of money that doesn't do anything, it's supposed to circulate around the economy. If it's not doing that, then it's not actually benefiting our society. So then you should change things. But you don't change things in a way that loses you the election. Truss is just trying to stay relevant for the grift she's politically done for. Possibly, but I don't think she sees it that way. She is grifting, don't get me wrong. She is saying things she knows is wrong. When she was at that conference, that MAGA conference last week, the CPAC thing, she was nodding and smiling to things she knew were wrong. So that's the grift element. But at the same time, I don't think she's done for. I don't think she thinks she's done for. She thinks she's got a resurrection in her. Why are income tax rates always full pence, never part pence? Example 40, not 40.5. Because it doesn't need to be. You don't need to balance it that finely. With taxation, you're trying to get as much as you can. So, like, politically, you're not going to... so if you have the 40% rate, so that's like the third band, you know, if you made it 40.5, you don't make it more politically acceptable, but you get more money. You know, like you could just make it 41. What I mean is, if the public were going to be against you, they'll be against you for 41%, just as much as 40.5. So you might as well make it 41%, and you'd get twice the boost. Well, you may get twice the boost. Yeah, that's right to say. Cigarette tax, or at least prices increased at least by times 5 in the last 10 years, but it was quite gradual throughout the last decade. That tends to be what happens. Because the government can justify increases in tobacco tax, because it's like a public health thing as well. It's, we're trying to discourage people from smoking, right? So they can justify that. So if you can do that with other taxes as well, justify an increase on them, what we need is more like luxury taxes. Could we go through the latest Yugo poll? Right, we've only got like a couple of minutes because I've got to disappear off. If you have a question, throw it out there. I'll just get it up really quickly. My favourite part is where it says only 5% of 18 to 24-year-olds are going to vote Tory. But if you have a particular question, I can certainly get it up. Let me have a look. Shall I put it up on the thing? Let's get rid of this because I didn't actually talk about this in the end, did I? Oh no, I'll just put this bit in. These are the data tables. Yeah. So in terms of the details of the YouGov polls, what have we got here that might be of interest? I mean, 26-point gap. That is the largest gap. And I know it's tempting when you look at different polls to go, oh, YouGov's at the top, so they're an outlier and blah, blah, blah. But YouGov are also, they've been, granted polling's going to be really hard this year, but they, on past performance, they are really good. Are property taxes any good? So there's been a lot of talk about council tax recently, hasn't there? And what we should do about it. There was a silly article in The Guardian that was immediately shat on by all tax lawyers going, oh, why don't we just change it to 3% of disposable income? At which point you go, well, what's disposable income? All you're doing there is encouraging people to spend more so they don't have to pay as much in tax. But I'm totally in favour of a different type of council tax. Now, you could do one of two things with council tax. You could either base it on the actual value of the property, or you could change it completely for another type of income tax. You know, why not have two types of income tax? I mean, I suppose we've already got two with national insurance, but two types of actual income tax. You have national and local income tax. What about that? So you have your national income tax, which goes off to Westminster government, and you have a local income tax, which could be like 5% or something, which goes to your local council. Wouldn't that be better rather than basing it on the property value? So that's what I would look at that. I don't think we had a question on that. But, we may have to go over the latest YouGov ones next week. Maybe this time next week, Rishi Sunak will have called the election. I'm not sure he will have done, but, you know, he might have done. In fact, next week is the first week where he might do it. Every week from next week onwards, he might do it, basically, is what I'm saying. We've sort of known up until this point he's not going to, because why would you do it before the budget? There's no point in it. Once the budget has been called, that could be it. But I do have to go, I'm afraid, because I've got to disappear out. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Anyway, we'll try and pick this up maybe next week, unless something else blows up. Have a good evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.